another episode of the Thrive and Design podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Lashae Hall, CEO and founder of Thrive and Design, where we help interior product companies expand their influence and revenue through human-centered design, strategy, and leadership. Today, I'm honored to welcome an extraordinary leader, Cheryl Durst, Executive Vice President and CEO of the International Interior Design Association, also known as IIDA. A visionary strategist and exceptional communicator, Cheryl has spent her career expanding the role of interior design, advocating for its value not just as an aesthetic discipline, but as a critical driver of business, equity, and societal impact. Under Cheryl's leadership, IIDA supports more than 15,000 members across 58 countries, advancing global conversations around design excellence, advocacy, education, and community. Widely recognized as an ambassador for innovation and expansion, Cheryl made history as the first African American woman inducted into the Interior Design Hall of Fame, receiving its inaugural Leadership Award in 2016. She also serves as the International Well Building Institute Governance Council and as a trustee for Chicago's Museum of Contemporary Art and the New York School of Interior Design. In today's episode, we move beyond buzzwords to explore what it truly means to expand the role of design, from leadership and advocacy to measurable business impact. We'll dive into Cheryl's perspective on the future of the industry, the intangible skills designers need to thrive, and how thoughtful design can shape healthier, more equitable environments. This is a conversation every design leader should hear. So let's dive in. Welcome to the show, Cheryl. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Hi, Nicole. That was, that's always interesting hearing about yourself before you're before you're jumping into a conversation. So thank you for that.
Yes, absolutely. So, Cheryl, let's frame this conversation and share a little bit about you, a little bit more about you. I know we
Yeah.
just read your introduction, but you spent decades advocating for the value of design. Tell me a little bit more about your journey and why do you think design is still often reduced to the aesthetics instead of recognized as a strategic business and human centered discipline?
Well, let me hit this from a couple of touch points. I came to my role as the CEO of IIDA. I've worked in this industry for over 30 years, started my career in design in Washington, D.C. I worked for the Washington Design Center, was a component of the Merchandise Mart, but in Washington, D.C. I headed up education and programming for designers there. Prior to that, I was a high school teacher. I am not a designer. My background is in journalism and economics. I'm a writer at heart, but I've always been a believer in education and optimism and advocacy. Human beings need to stand for something. And design is something that, although we are often passionate about the practice of design, kind of articulating the meaning of design has always been something that has been critical to me and to my career. How do we talk about design and what does it mean? Most people who aren't designers kind of default to aesthetics, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with aesthetics and beauty, but design is so much more than that. And so helping human beings understand, and then ultimately from a business standpoint, kind of the C-suite, people who are consuming design services, helping them understand that design is a driver, right? It is not
Hmm.
it is not passive. It is a driver for your business goals. It is a driver for success. It is a driver for equity and belonging. It is a driver for revenue. And so having those conversations around the impact of design, and not just on the bottom line, but its impact on humanity, has always been intrinsic to my career. And so obviously it ultimately led me to, I started with IIDA as the director of education, became CEO after about 3 years at the association. And so kind of those pillars of optimism and advocacy and just the narrative around design have always been central to the work that I've done.
I love that. And I'm wondering if did you ever have this aha moment about design and I guess its impact on the world, especially coming from education, right? You were a high school teacher and you transitioned into this
Right,
industry. So what was your
right.
aha moment of like, oh, like this is the impact that design is having on the world?
You cannot separate the impact that place has on people, right?
Hmm.
I remember as a child hearing my mom, who was a scientist, a microbiologist, would talk about geography is destiny. And she was talking about that from a health context. She specialized in infectious diseases. And she was talking about it from a health context. I always thought about it as, we are informed by the places that we inhabit.
Hmm.
And whether that is from an ancestral context or particularly from a learning standpoint, my father was an educator. And so when I taught in DC, I had a freshman homeroom and I had a class of 40 students, but I had 32 desks. And so I remember a group of students walking into that classroom, and immediately, what does that tell you? What did that tell them when there wasn't a place for them to sit? What does
Mm.
that immediately make you feel like? And so that was a grounding moment for me. But even as a child growing up, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, and I remember what it felt like to be in their home. I remember the first time my grandmother took me to a library and what that space felt like. I took art classes as a child, and that sense of awe and wonder and curiosity that I had walking into a museum.
Yeah.
And so this really soul deep connection between people and place has always been something that has interested me, intrigued me, and also inspired me.
Yeah, and I love the memories tied to place too. I remember when I was in design school, we had to do this project like what was our third place, right?
Oh,
Outside of home, outside of school, like what was that third place that we have so many memories tied to in designing based on that inspiration. So that's what your story reminds me of.
yeah,
Now,
yeah. Place storytelling is fascinating, and I think everybody has a story about that first place. You talked about third places, but
mhm,
what's that first place that we remember as a child, or that first place that had impact on us? And it's anywhere from familial to cultural, but nostalgia is
mhm.
super powerful, and the power of memories to impact us is incredible, and it's often tied to place.
Yeah, I love that. And so with design and in your role at IIDA now, like you're touching a lot of the world, really, in so many places, so many types of design, so many stakeholders in the design process,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So with design serving so many different stakeholders, far too many to list and name in the
Right,
time that we have
right,
from
right.
end users to business leaders to manufacturers, where do you see the biggest disconnect in how we talk about design's value across that ecosystem?
I love this question. It's a complex one because I was educated as a journalist. Words matter. And I often think that the lexicon and vocabulary that we often have in design further allows design to be mystified, and thinking about what people respond to, but thinking about how often designers need to translate language for clients or customers. And I think about the connection between, particularly in commercial design, between designers and the C-suite.
Hmm.
And very often you are communicating with someone who has business objectives in mind, and they haven't considered design as a business objective. And so using our words and our vocabulary to make sure that C-suite or business owners are understanding the outcomes of design, right? Because people have to get beyond kind of that immediate surface level. And so again, that's often the conversation stops at beauty, stops at aesthetics. There's often the belief that design is a luxury as opposed to necessity. And so
Hmm.
when we start using words like impact and bottom line and return on investment, and I'm not talking about diminishing the
Right.
power of beauty. We don't ever want to do that. So I think that designers need to be part-time linguists as
Yeah.
well, as we are talking about the deep, deep impact of design, but also realizing design needs to be paid for,
Yeah.
right? It needs to be championed and it needs to be paid for. And some of those best champions around design and change, right? Because that's another powerful word that we can use when you're talking to a business owner about change and the built environment. And so thinking about those very simple words that all point to the impact that design has, not necessarily the cost of design, right? Because the minute people start thinking about beauty and aesthetics, that takes you to luxury and that takes you to expensive.
Yeah.
And, we need to think about the impact to support human beings and also to support change in an organization and change within people.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you break it down like that, especially for me as someone who went to interior design school. You actually don't learn the linguistics behind what you just said. A lot of design school is like, okay, you're in foundations and you're learning the foundation of fine art. And then you start your design core curriculum and you're learning, I guess, like programming and problem solving depending on like what vertical you're focusing on for that class, and ultimately, creating the designs. But a lot of what you just said is not taught in design school in terms
Right.
of understanding the ROI, understanding the impact of your design, and how you are articulating that to different stakeholders in the design process,
Yeah.
especially the ones that are paying the money, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how have you seen, I guess, that important language learned or adopted in our industry?
So I think about healthcare design in particular, and when you hear healthcare designers talking about evidence-based design,
Hmm.
right? That immediately speaks to hospital administrators, that immediately speaks to folks who are dealing with risk and liability and risk management or reducing liability, as well as patient care. So I think that, terminology, and I'm not talking about sugarcoating and making up words, but design is research based.
Hmm.
It is rigorous, right? There is order and rigor and import to the work that design does on behalf of humanity. And so it's aggregating, those words and that terminology to better build a case for design, because unfortunately, we continually need to build a case for our profession and build a case for the work that we do as designers. And it doesn't mean being on necessarily being defensive, but it is, we are as viable as any other profession. I think sometimes, though, what makes it difficult for people to 100% wrap their heads around design is it is not only are we touching the physical human being, there's a part of it that's the soul. It's
Absolutely.
really hard to qualify and quantify the impact that we have on the soul of human beings,
Yeah.
to create change. And so I keep coming back. I probably, you could turn this into a drinking game, how many times I use the word impact, but thinking about how we articulate impact. Right. And so
Yeah.
metrics would be one way. Absolutely. Metrics and analytics would be another. I think case studies are so valuable for designers to show that evidence of what we do and how that can change an organization or change, what an organization is doing. And then belonging is another part of that conversation. I think what has helped us, at least in the last, certainly since the pandemic, is the emphasis on well-being.
Hmm.
Physical well-being, emotional well-being, spaces that are safe
Yeah.
for human beings to thrive in, so not just live in, but thrive in. I think the conversation around emotional well-being has tremendously helped the profession of interior design, supported the profession of interior design.
Yeah. And with all of those different topics and like words, one of the things that we talked about in our initial conversation was a common language or a shared language for the
Shared language.
industry,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Whether that's wellness, inclusion, belonging, strategy, ROI, or impact, even. Um, I guess how would you like to see all of our stakeholders sharing a common language when it comes to creating an understanding about the design process?
So I think it's also this idea. I mean, design is a multiplicity of things, right? And specifically, we are talking about interior design. Well, it's an art, It's a
Hmm.
science and it's a business. And
Yeah.
I think there is already a pretty clear understanding around the artfulness,
Yeah.
right, of interiors. I think there is less understanding around the science of interior design. And so that was, talking about data, talking about metrics, but making that data human, letting that data tell a story. And then I think where, we sometimes lose people or people aren't quite closing that gap is around interior design as a business. And
Hmm.
so that means interior designers need to be really proficient in this talking of this three-legged stool and talking about interiors design specifically and interior specifically as an art, a science, and a business, and
Yeah.
helping their clients understand that. For me, design is about what happens on the receiving end. And
Hmm.
so how do we start talking about the language of outcomes?
Yeah.
How are we using the language of outcomes to explain what we do and the value of what we do?
Yeah. I want to see like more business classes and interior design programs to get that language.
Definitely starting to see this trend in more designers from a postgraduate standpoint pursuing masters, so an MBA,
Hmm.
right? Starting to see more designers go down that path. It is fairly difficult to double major in interior design and business from an
Absolutely.
undergraduate standpoint because the undergraduate curriculum for designers, there's so much depth and breadth. There often isn't room for undergraduate interior designer to even breathe, let alone thinking about double majoring. But
Yeah.
definitely seeing more interior design students minoring in business, but also minoring in psychology, sociology, and so those what once upon a time I think people called those softer sciences, but those
Mm.
sciences arrayed around human behavior, because that's the other piece of this, right? Design isn't about things. Design is about people.
Yeah.
Interior design is about people, right? And how they are interacting and behaving and living and thriving in an interior environment. And so having that understanding of human behavior is just so intrinsic. My gut tells me, and this is starting to happen. I know this conversation is happening from a curriculum standpoint, that interior design really does merit a 5-year program.
It does. It does for all of those topics that you just mentioned. Right. And so with the industry kind of evolving, we see a lot of different like factors impacting the industry. We've gone through a pandemic, right? And people are looking towards the future as well. So not only thinking about this like shared language that we're talking about, but like what does the future look like? And with IIDA, you all have a certified design futurist program that I've
Correct.
stumbled across a few times, and I'm like,
Good.
I'm like, what is this all about?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
this signals a shift towards foresight as a design capability. So, how do you define foresight in practice, and what changes when firms begin offering it as a service?
So we really are looking at our certified design futurist curriculum about kind of expanding a competency for interior designers, right? And you and I have heard these conversations about other professions kind of picking away at design. We certainly see, design thinking as a term that is used, bandied about. People will say, "Hire me, I'm a design thinker," whatever that might mean, right? But we certainly know that there are consultants out there who are using design or leveraging design strategy maybe without having a professional background in design. And then we are seeing end users and clients hiring design strategists as opposed to professional interior designers. And so thinking about this in terms of a professional interior design organization, it was all about what can we do to expand the current competencies of interior designers and looking toward the future. And foresight is something that designers use all the time, whether they
Yeah.
realize it or not. When you are creating the built environment, when you're creating an interior environment, you're not just doing it for the now of that client, you're doing it for their next. And so there's always been, this rigorous thought about what's next for your clients, even though the client may not be deeply invested in it. And so strategic foresight is a very structured, systematic discipline that is used to kind of explore and anticipate for multiple futures for a brand or for an organization. And so it's not about foretelling, it's not a crystal ball, it's not about being predicted, but you're kind of analyzing a disparate set of signals and possible disruptions to your future that allows you to be proactive in decision making. It's very processed and organized. There's a process, there's a methodology, which design in and of itself has a process and a methodology. But it was something for IIDA that it just made sense that it was a skill set that we could further enhance and develop for designers. And so we have this 10-week course that is an introduction to strategic foresight.
Yeah.
There are firms out there, right? Because an engagement with a designer or a design firm may not necessarily end in a built environment. It may end up in a new way of thinking for an organization or a new set of tools or resources to do something different to drive your future. And so kind of looking at the consulting side of design or a consultancy, it could evolve into a change in the built environment. But firms who are using this with their clients are finding that they are keeping those clients longer. They're involved in deeper, more strategic organizations from the top of the organization. And so it's helping firms build longer term relationships with their clients and then opening doors to new sets of clients in new industries as well.
Yeah. So as a follow-up of that, because I've had a few other guests that have talked about a similar word of like forecasting, right? So in terms of like trend forecasting or color forecasting
Right.
and understanding that. But what you all are doing in terms of like foresight in for design futurists is completely different. So can you break down what's the difference between a design futurist and a design forecaster?
So forecasting, and both are valuable, right?
Yeah.
Forecasting is valuable and foresight is valuable. Forecasting tends to be a bit more specific, right? So it's often short term. And so, like you mentioned, right, a color forecast, right? They're really based on current data and trends. Foresight is more long term. You're looking at kind of a diverse set of uncertainties, and you're looking at scenarios that might be unpredictable. And so instead of being a very specific silo, foresight takes you down a longer path to look at a series of scenarios. And again, I said earlier, kind of a disparate set of conditions that you're putting together. I'll use a super colloquial term, but you're connecting dots,
Yeah.
right, to come out with a series of scenarios that can help drive a future or drive your actions. And it just allows the person on the receiving end to be a bit more proactive, right? You can't just let the future happen to you. Foresight gives you more control over a preferred future for yourself or your organization.
Yeah. And then how does that apply to, say, a manufacturer, right? We talked about what that looks like for maybe a designer or a design firm, but a lot of my listeners are product manufacturers. So if they're listening, they're like, okay, well, how does this apply to us as an organization? Tell us more about that.
Right? So, what a manufacturer could do is look at a set of conditions, right? You can look at the birth rates are currently going down. So if I am a manufacturer of anything that's education based or K through 12 based, and we're seeing trends in education are moving in a different direction and birth rates are going down, and we're not looking at a massive baby boom headed our way, I am going to think differently about what classroom needs might be in the next 5 to 10 years. I will think differently about product based on what classroom needs might be. There's going to be an educator shortage in the next 5 years. You start combining declining birth rates with an educator shortage. What's that mean for the classroom of the future? Will classrooms look different? Will they be housed differently? Will a curriculum look differently? And so kind of taking a look at different aspects within a cohort is what strategic foresight would do. So you're combining demographics, you're combining changes in a profession, you're combining human attitudes around education. We're seeing some of that aspect now, where higher ed, for a number of reasons, isn't in the same favor that it may have been 10 or 20 years ago. But also we're seeing a boom in junior colleges, where people over the age of 50 are going back to school, back to 2-year programs for upskilling or reskilling. And so I might, as a manufacturer, start looking differently, maybe at a cohort I had never paid attention to with junior colleges, or how training is happening in different aspects, as opposed to the verticals that I might be embedded in deeply now.
Cheryl,
Yeah?
you cut out for a second.
Oh,
I have
okay.
Brett, my podcast producer, just jumped in. Brett, did she cut out there on your end?
I noticed that you froze for a second.
Sure.
I think that strategic foresight can be particularly helpful for manufacturers in looking at directions that we're seeing culturally and socially. I'll use education as an example, looking at trends that may seem very disparate, something along the lines of birth rates. If we know that birth rates are going down, that's going to affect what enrollment in school is going to look like in the next 12 to 18 to 26 years. But we also look at this trend that more of us are returning to 2-year programs, for instance, in junior colleges, and to be retrained and reskilled, right? We all need to be upskilled in some way, shape, or form. And there has been a tremendous explosion in junior colleges. Also, just this whole idea around what a 4-year degree is worth, that's also contributing, right, to this explosion in junior colleges. And so what strategic foresight allows us to do is look at a series of what may seem like disparate dots. We're looking at birth rates, we're looking at education rates, we're looking at maybe downturns in people even becoming teachers. You're combining all of these, again, what feels like unrelated facts, to look at one solid picture of what a future might look like. And that's just one scenario,
Yeah.
but it's this ability to look at a multiplicity of scenarios to look at what a future could be.
Yeah, I love that you broke it down like that, especially on the manufacturer side. I know as I've worked in sales on the manufacturer side, and a lot of times I'm always thinking about like, okay, what does this design need today? Or and that today could look like the next 12 months.
Right.
But thinking about it in the future in the way that you just broke it down of like, okay, how is this shifting in so many different points? How can you design not only for today, but think about the evolution of this of the people in that space and how they're going to be interacting or coming to the school or not coming to the school, etc., impacts the design of the
Yeah.
future. So
Yeah.
I love that. I need to sign up
Yeah.
for this course. So
Yeah.
my brain is already going
Yeah.
in so many different ways.
Well, and it's not just one thing, right? It's not just data. It's
Hmm.
it's culture and it's attitudes and it's behavior. And foresight really gives you a tool to look at kind of all of these arenas across the board, to show that how you can best leverage what you know now and what scenarios you can put together for a future to understand that for your business or for your brand.
I love that. And I know, Cheryl, you all just had your roundtable in January. Before we go into the last few questions, I would love to for you to share any like top insights that came out of that, especially for manufacturers and designers.
So this is our industry roundtable, and we have been doing this for almost 30 years. It is an evergreen IIDA signature program that we do at headquarters. And the whole premise is we put manufacturers and designers in a room together in a very kind of intimate think tank format. And it's to kind of hold forth on issues that are germane to both designers and to manufacturers. And so that's really the premise of IIDA, is really this better connection between designers and product manufacturers, right? Because we are invested in the same industry. And so this year our topic was demographics and
Mhm.
identity. And so we talked a lot about, again, this was a lot about attitudes and behaviors, but we had a woman from Miami of Ohio and she specializes in demographics and age, and she's written a book called Gentelligence, but it's leveraging a diversity of ages and how we are best performing with a multiplicity of millennials and Gen X's and boomers, right? Because we know the workplace is now filled with five, almost six generations in the workplace. And as opposed to giving attributes to a generation like an astrological sign, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm a Sagittarius and a boomer, right? It's kind of uncoupling that, but what is it that each generation brings to work that we can leverage the value, but also just understanding, again, it's back to attitudes and behavior, understanding what the motivations are, what inspires certain generations, right? Because we are all different. We certainly have, based on when we were born and where we were born and how we
Mhm.
grew up, we've been shaped by so many factors, and that obviously implies to the interior environment as well. And so it was a very lively conversation, and we also had the people in the room that we were talking about. And I've always been a firm believer, it's like, we're going to sit there and talk about Gen X, then let's have Gen X in the room
Absolutely.
to kind of share that insight as well, understanding that we are all on the receiving end, but we also have Gen X and Gen Y designers who are creating as well. They think about product differently, they think about interiors differently, they think about the client relationship differently. And so we kind of had that conversation from the inside out and thinking about all the ways that generations impact us. And when Dr. Megan Gearhart was our specialist, and we also had Upali Nanda, who's the head of research for HKS. But one of the things Dr. Gearhart said that was really impactful for a lot of people, I think, is take a look around you and look at how many generations you surround yourselves by. And so
Yeah.
she talked about, if you're over 40, chances are, with the exception of your family, everybody that you hang around with is about the same age. And
Yeah.
so one of the things she talked about is we need to kind of break out of our age cohorts and making sure that we have a multi-generational life.
Yeah. That's important. It's important. And I came out of college in 2012, and I feel like at that point there were so many articles in the media talking badly about millennials. Like everything was just like stigmas about millennials are this and millennials are that. And I'm sure Gen Z feels the same right
Yeah.
now. So it's really wonderful when I see topics that are like, okay, let's talk about multi generational experiences, having each generation in the room and actually learning from one another. I'm a person who is mid 30s, a millennial, but like I have friends that are almost 60. I have friends that are just straight out of college because I want to learn from the wiser and also share what I have with younger, but also people who are 20 something will probably teach me something that I don't know.
Well,
Um
it's I love that you said that.
yeah.
And it's also that myth busting, because we talked a bit about mentoring, and everybody
Mm.
thinks that mentors have gray hair. But I mean, mentoring can
It,
happen in
across.
so many across, right? And that's what we have to remember. And it's that cross generational, multi generational aspect. And so many of us don't live in multi generational households anymore. That ability to talk to people in any age cohort, it just makes you a broader minded person. And so living intergenerationally is and multi-generationally is becoming very much a mantra for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I look forward to hearing all the insights that continue to come out of that roundtable and the roundtables to come.
Yep, I'll be
So,
excited. We have 28 insights from Industry Roundtable 28 that I'll be able to share with you soon.
okay, I can't wait. And so, Cheryl, we talked a lot today about lots of different topics from the future of design to the language and shared language. But one of the things that I don't want to miss talking about, especially as the future of the design, is Black and Brown students that are coming up in this industry, right? I am one of very few women of
Mm-hmm.
color that came out of my interior design program at Syracuse, but you all are doing some great work with your Design Your World program at
Mm-hmm.
IIDA.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a very critical moment because you're reaching back to high school students before they even get into design school. So tell me a little bit more about that program and the work that you all are doing to shape the future of design, especially when it comes to Black and Brown students in our
Yep.
industry.
Yep. Design Your World for us started in 2020, and so it was a dream of a program that I had had for many, many years. It came to fruition, unfortunately, at the same time as the pandemic. So our very first cohort, which we were in Chicago, where IIDA is headquartered, we did it virtually. But the objective of the program is to introduce interior design as a viable career for folks who are under championed, under resourced, whatever the word is. But and that doesn't necessarily mean that all of our students are Black and brown, or it doesn't necessarily mean that this is pointed at Black and brown students. However, we are
Hmm.
well aware of just the disparity around Black and brown professionals in our industry. And so it was our goal to create this program to introduce interior design as a career. It is a viable career pursuit where you can make a living, you can be happy and healthy, and we very deliberately called it Design Your World because we wanted our students to look around at their world to see how design could make an impact on their world. And so we are in Chicago, St. Louis, Miami, and Dallas. And so program is alive and well, and it's been going on now. We're moving into our 6th year. We now have over a dozen of our alumni who are in undergraduate programs in design and architecture.
That's
We're playing the long game with
yeah.
this, right? And so slowly but surely, we are seeing our students come through school and then enter into careers in design. We have support from a phenomenal number of partners like OFS and Mannington on the manufacturing side, and then firms like Jacobs and Gensler and Perkins and Will are supporting us. And it's incredible to see students have this access to
Yeah.
interior design as a career. And it is important for us to give these students tools, because even if they never decide to major in interior design and architecture, they will have had this introduction to this profession. But learning about how to assess and think and critically think like a designer is important to this program, and keeping these students connected to one another so that they see one another and so that they see Black and brown professionals
Absolutely.
thriving and succeeding. And then also giving them the tools to talk about design. The very first people that we're learning from many of these students is when they tell a parent or a guardian, I am interested in design as a career, they're told, nope,
Yep.
that
I
that's
had
not
that.
what that's not what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And then if anybody's listening and they're like, I love the mission, I want to support, I want to help the students, how can they be involved?
Go to IIDA.org, to our website, or Google Design Your World. We are always looking for support. We're looking for volunteers to help us. We've got a really great curriculum. We always want more manufacturers to help sponsor. And the way that we can move this program to additional cities, aside from the 4 that we're in, is through sponsor and manufacturer support.
Awesome. Well, Cheryl, it has been a pleasure having you on the show and sharing a little bit about your personal journey and aha moments of like memories from your childhood, memories from being a teacher, and how that really impacted how you saw the world of design, all the way till now, and how you are shaping different areas of the design industry, from the design futurism to the program for the students. I'm just here for all of it. And I can't wait to continue connecting and also be a supporter. So,
Oh,
Cheryl, if anyone wants to connect with IIDA, be a member, or even connect with you, where can they find you all online?
www.iida.org. You can reach out to me personally via LinkedIn or Instagram.
All right. Well, Cheryl, thank you so much for being a part of the show. It's been a pleasure.